I'd like to welcome everybody here. This is our budget hearing for Granite School District. It is Tuesday, June 17th at 6:02 p.m. and we're going to begin by indicating who's here. We have Clark online, so we'll begin with him.
Clark Nelson.
Julie Jackson.
Kim Chandler.
Connie Burgess.
Chris Wynn.
Todd Hopper.
Ben Worsley.
Nicole McDermott. We're going to excuse Karen Winder. She had a prior commitment and was unable to get out of that, so we will miss her, but we appreciate Clark being online. We're going to go ahead and turn the time over to Brian, who's in the hot seat. Brian Nipson and Todd Hopper for our budget presentation.
Thank you, President McDermott. Thank you, Board, for opportunity to quickly go through this coming year's budget and just some of the highlights of that budget. We appreciate the opportunity. Okay, what we're going to talk about today is the funds of the district that are included in the budget proposal for this coming fiscal year, where you can find the budget, what some of the priorities were that were included in that proposed budget. We'll get into property tax rates and the proposed increases in those property tax rates, and then finally the recommended board motions for this evening. So every year we produce an annual budget book, and this budget book, this year we've started including artwork from students on the front cover, and that's what's on the cover of this. It kind of adds a little bit of entertainment value to the budget book when you're going through to read it. It seems funner if there's a cool picture on the front cover.
Are you saying it's
right?
not entertaining in and of itself?
Yeah.
Or at least one parent will look at it besides us.
The budget book has a balanced budget for all the funds for which you all as the board have legal responsibility and authority. So that includes the general fund, maintenance and operations in the general fund, the district activity fund, which is school fees, donations, fundraisers, the pass-through tax fund. These are taxes levied for redevelopment and for charter schools specifically. The GEF fund, which is our Granite Education Foundation, 501c3 nonprofit entity. The capital outlay fund, which is for construction, renovation, and maintenance of schools and other district buildings. Debt service, which covers our bond payments. And then school lunch for our breakfast and lunch programs in our schools. And every year this budget book contains two different pieces to it. One is a revised or final budget for the fiscal year that's just ending. So for this 24-25 school year, a revised budget, and then a tentative or proposed budget for the coming school year, the 25-26 school year. The same process on a high level is followed to establish a budget for each fund. So the beginning piece is knowing what we have, estimating our available revenues and the resources that are available to cover our obligations and our expenditures. This is through information from the legislative session, from property taxes, from federal funds. There are many different sources that fund the expenditures of the district. And then we get into estimating the expenditures and the things that are going to be required to run the school district for the coming year. And we kind of call this the planned spending process, where we're compiling data and getting input from across the district, from different district departments and schools and all of the people that are in the know about what is needed out there, can put in their planned spending requests. And specifically, if there is a request for new resources or new programs or something new that isn't in the budget in the current year, there's a budget request form where that department or that person can explain how their request fits in with district strategic priorities and the vision of the school district and the board. Finally, the big goal from the whole project is to balance the budget and ensure that we're not spending money we don't have. So expenditures should not exceed available resources, sound budgeting principle, right, that applies across the board. That adopted budget, once it's approved in a budget hearing, is in place for the next year and can be amended throughout the year by the board, by board action. But typically, we have one formal adjustment of that budget, which is the one that happens in June of the following year. Where can you get to the budget? On our main graniteschools.org website, there is a bulletin out there that has information about this hearing tonight, along with all of the proposed budget PDF document and other information that interested patrons can get to out on our website.
How long is that available, like on our homepage, do we know?
That's a good question. It will be available for at least a couple of weeks out there. The budget document itself will stay available on the budget development webpage throughout the fiscal year. But for at least a couple weeks, that will be available on the front page.
So it's on the main page, and then we convert it after this hearing and the budget is approved formally, then we start advertising the truth in taxation.
Yeah.
So it'll be on
Which
the
will then
homepage
bring the
for the
budget
duration.
back onto the front page again.
Okay.
Summary of all funds, you can see the general fund and capital outlay are the bulk of what we are doing as far as planned proposed budget for next school year. Pretty much all salaries and benefits, with the exception of food service employees, are included in the general fund, and that's the bulk of what happens of that $725 million in the general fund. And then capital outlay, the big pieces there are our ongoing construction projects at Skyline and Cypress. Other renovations and rebuilds are part of that $105 million in capital outlay. Then we get into budget priorities for the coming school year. And as I mentioned, these have all been aimed at aligning with a strategic priority of the district. So when we're considering how we're going to spend our money in the new year, we're trying to fit it into the academic, social skills and dispositions, talent development areas. There are also some costs that are identified which maybe fit into multiple of those areas. So some of those operational costs can include things that probably overlap into all of those areas, along with compensation adjustments for employees and different things in that area. But overall, that $39 million number is including each of those pieces. And you can kind of see the pie chart that shows that split between the various areas of, again, these are requests for either new programs or new costs that were not something that was happening in fiscal year 25. We'll get into the details of what each of these things are. The priorities in the academic area include adjustments to class sizes in grades K through 2. So in our funding formula for those grades, helping to reduce class sizes in our elementary schools. Software for English learners from a Lost State grant, college access support for high school students, and then in the social skills and dispositions, we have Safe School Light staffing. That's run through our prevention and student placement department, and replacement of a Lost State gang prevention grant that went away at the end of the 24-25 school year. In the talent development area, elementary prep time for teachers. So this includes providing hourly support to give elementary school teachers time to prepare each week. That hourly employee would essentially take their class during a small portion of the day and allow them time for prep. Instructional coach support at each school. So this is, if we go back here, the 38 FTE in the talent development area is related to those instructional coaches and providing additional coaching and supports for our educators in our schools. In the operations area, Brockbank Junior High reopening and associated operational costs of that reopening. Administrative supports in schools. So this has been a big push to try to get at least a half an FTE in each elementary school in our district, so that every school has an extra assistant principal or some kind of additional administrative support to help with behavioral issues, to help with all of the things a principal does in a school. School safety requirements, there have been a couple of bills passed in the last few legislative sessions to impose additional requirements on the district as far as safety in schools. The biggest one was the school guardians that are required now in every school in our district, and so that's a big commitment and a big chunk of money to provide those guardians and the other supports that are needed to comply with laws. School fees, there are certain school fees that are going away that can't be charged in our secondary schools beginning next school year, and so this is providing for a replacement of that funding to our secondary schools so that they can continue to provide the programs that were funded with those fees previously. And then custodial support in our newly opened schools. For example, at Cypress, there will be additional square footage that doesn't exist on the current Cypress High campus that will necessitate additional custodial support in that new building. And that's the case as we rebuild schools and have new openings. That creates that additional need for custodial support. And then last is the compensation piece. As far as things that have been negotiated with the Granite Education Association and other employee groups, we have built into the budget funding of employee steps and lane advancements on the salary schedule, in addition to a 1.75% COLA for all employee groups across the board. A piece that factors into this as well is the changes that were made in the legislative session to remove the professional staff program that used to fund us based on the experience level of our educators, and we no longer are receiving money through that program and instead are receiving kind of something that allocates more on a strictly WPU basis, which means we lose $2.2 million is the bottom line there with the change that they've made to that funding formula. And then finally, another legislative requirement was that we offer parental and postpartum leave to our employees that's at least as on the same level as the state benefit, and that's required at the beginning of this coming fiscal year, and so that piece has also been included in the budget and the substitute costs and other things that will result from offering that benefit to employees. So when we put this all together and look at balancing the budget and the general fund, we've got approximately $13.7 million in WPU value increase funding, additional revenues. We have some savings from risk management premiums for our insurance that didn't end up being as high as we had anticipated in a previous budget cycle. We have a little bit of money from property tax new growth, and to clarify, this is funding from new properties in the school district. So not on existing properties, because we essentially are given the same revenue as the prior year, but we do receive new growth on new properties that come online in the district. Other MSP changes of $1.2 million. This is mostly in the state at-risk program that we anticipate getting some additional funds there in fiscal year 26. Some savings from budget adjustments and FTE adjustments at the district, and then also the closure of 2 elementary schools at Orchard and Redwood in fiscal year 26. It's 2.2 million. And then another 500,000. Todd, you're gonna have to remind me.
So these are, we did receive a bit of a grant for our preschool program. So we had applied and didn't receive the full amount because we were asking for 1.5 million. We received 500,000, but this is a good signal. We get in at the ground level, and as more monies come through the state, we can anticipate more funding flowing through, but this is that piece.
I didn't mean to forget the preschool funding. I knew that. So ultimately, where this gets us when we consider some available one-time fund balances that are available and state one-time revenues to cover the school fee loss of about $6 million, it leaves us with an approximate $13.2 million hole to fill in the general fund budget in order to balance things and get us to where we're paying for each of these priorities and different things we've talked about. So we'll get into what that means on the property tax side in just a second. On the capital side, I mentioned already the Cypress.
Brian?
Oh, yeah.
I just, a couple of questions that I know my community is going to want me to ask. Should I wait till the end or ask them as we go? I just am not sure.
Unless they're about a specific slide, let's keep
They
all
are about the
questions.
specific like bullets.
Yeah, if I can speak.
Go ahead.
We'd hope to go through the presentation, actually walk through the public hearing, which this is about, and then allow questions from the board before any motions are made, if that's okay.
The schedule for school rebuilds and remodels includes the Cypress and Skyline High projects that are ongoing or nearing completion, actually, along with remodels or rebuilds at West Kearns, Calvin Smith, Taylorsville High. That's improvements and select portions of that beginning in the summer of 2026, but there's multiple pieces to that project. Moss Elementary and Plymouth Elementary. So there are a number of scheduled projects that are on the docket for the next couple of years that are built into the priorities and budget in the capital fund. Along with Rockbank Junior and Magna Elementary reopening Rockbank Junior reopening and Magna Elementary kind of reopening as a STEAM school in fiscal year 26. And then finally, we just have our ongoing school building maintenance and repairs and deferred maintenance that goes along with that on a number of our buildings that have things that need to happen that have not occurred yet just due to funding constraints. And so we're always working and chipping away at those ongoing maintenance and repairs in our buildings. So let's get down to what this means for property tax rates on the proposed budget. I've tried to put this together to color code it a little bit and help make sense out of it. I know that there's multiple pieces to this and that it can get confusing for anyone looking at this or trying to understand it. So we'll go through each piece of this separately, but try to be quick about it and get through this quickly. So on a high level, the certified rate each year is intended to bring in the same revenue as what the school district received in the year previous, with the addition of that new growth that we talked about before. And so the certified rate column here is what the Salt Lake County auditor gives us and tells us, okay, if you levy this rate, you can do that, and the revenue that brings in is not considered a tax increase. Any adjustment we make above and beyond the certified rate is then considered to be a tax increase for their purposes and the state tax commission. So the state basic levy is the levy that we are required to have as part of participation in the minimum school program for the state. So we have to levy this tax at the amount the state tells us to do that at, based on state statute. Based on what the legislature does, their action, we levy the rate that's required of us for the state basic levy. This is still an estimate at this point. We don't know what that rate is for sure. This is the rate that gets us to a revenue target that's similar to last year. On the voted local levy, this rate has actually come down as a result of that certified tax rate process, and is bringing in the revenues that the certified rate would bring in. We've highlighted the board, local, and charter school levies together here in pink to show how those two work in relation to each other. So essentially, Granite has an obligation to levy a tax that supports the charter schools in our area. There's a formula that the state puts out and sends numbers out that shows essentially number of charter school students in our district boundaries that are attending charter schools, and there's a portion of the local revenues that we receive as a district that we have to contribute in to paying for those charter schools on a state level. And so that's the purpose of the charter school levy that is broken out separately, but in reality it's part of that board local levy, meaning they certify a rate and then the charter school levy is peeled off of that, and we just have to, we lose the money that that costs for the overall piece of the charter schools, whatever that number is, that's coming off the top of the board local levy revenues that are generated. And so in fiscal year 26, that number actually increased by 1.4 million. So it was somewhere just below 6 million in fiscal year 25, and it's gone up to 7.4 million in fiscal year 26. And what that means is that we actually have a $1.4 million hole right off the bat in our board local levy that has to be filled in order to get just back to the same number that we had in fiscal year 25. And that's just the way that is set up, that when that number increases, we stand to lose revenue. The big drivers of that increase this year are, one, changes in the way that the state is determining which charter school students are in our school district boundaries. So they've done some geocaching and some other methods to determine or pinpoint more accurately from their side what they believe to be the district of residence students from Granite that are attending charter schools. And so that number has changed a bit and has increased that contribution that Granite's required to make through the charter school levy. In addition, our local revenues have increased recently with the changes to both our capital local levy to rebuild schools. That has increased over the last few years. And then if you recall, 2 years ago, we had the $4 an hour increase for our ESP employees. And as we raise taxes there to do that, that actually increases the calculation, and it follows from there that our charter school levy revenue target is going to increase. So we'll get into the next slide that will show exactly what the impact of that is, broken out of this rate adjustment that's showing on the board local levy piece. There's a piece that goes essentially to the charter school levy, and another piece that's actually truly funding the 13.1 million that we saw on a previous slide. On the capital local side, we have our regular capital. We've kind of always broken this out into two pieces. One that's the regular ongoing maintenance of our school buildings, and then the school rebuilds or pay-as-you-go piece of funding all of the construction projects that are planned on the GSD Future website. So this is actually funding the revenue target that we had here of getting us to the place that we wanted to get to on a dollar standpoint. But in reality, if you recall from previous years, we had this rate frozen between the debt service and the capital for school rebuilds. We're actually allowing that to come down some from that frozen rate, but still get us to the same revenue target that we had budgeted for originally. And that's just because property values have increased by about 5.2% when we were planning on conservatively a 2% increase in property values this year. So that rate is lower than what it would have been if we had kept that frozen in the proposed budget. The adjustment for the regular capital is just simply trying to bring in, it's around $1 million of additional revenue to start chipping away at that ongoing deferred maintenance on our buildings. So
That's the fund that's been sitting stale for the last 20 some odd years, and obviously costs for maintenance have increased dramatically in that period of time.
yes, correct. So each of these increases, those adjustments, we've tried to color code them and keep them so you can see from the previous slide to this one which rate it is or which levy it is we're talking about. We'll start with the board local. On the operations side, there's an increase of about 6.25%, or we also have this on an average home basis of a $565,000 home, which is the average value in the district, what that would look like for a property taxpayer with that home. So that's about 70, 78, 60 for an average home, and brings in that 13.2 million that we saw in the previous slide to balance our general fund budget. Deferred maintenance is another $5.91 or 0.47%, and brings in that $1 million, just under $1 million in additional revenues for deferred maintenance. On the school rebuilds, It's just over 1% or $13.37 for an average home, bringing in about $2.2 million. And again, that's consistent with that revenue target that we had previously when we were estimating growth at 2%. And then finally, so if we total up the district piece, the stuff that the district's actually going to see of this increase, we're at about $98 for an average property taxpayer, or a 7.78% increase. And then we have this piece that's recovering that lost revenue from the charter levy, which adds an additional $8.39, or gets us just over 106 in total. Again, that piece is not new revenue coming to the district, but essentially just recovery of revenue that was going to go away through the charter levy. So with that, that's the explanation of the property tax rates and what the proposal is to do with those property tax rates. Recommended motions tonight would be to approve that final revised budget for fiscal year 25, adopt the budget for the new year, along with setting a preliminary tax rate at 0.006164, which is what we just looked at in that previous slide, and schedule a truth and taxation hearing to be held on August 5th for the purpose of discussing these property tax increases that we've just talked about. So with that, I'll pass it back to you, President McDermott. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to go ahead and move to the public comment portion of our meeting. And again, remind anybody who's here, if you'd like to sign up, there's still time. But we're going to go ahead and invite Amy to come up first. Amy Warren, please make sure you state your name clearly in the microphone. We'll give you 3 to 5 minutes, and you are welcome to address the board.
My name's Amy Warren, and I just wanted to say thank you for working so hard on this. I know there was some hard decisions to make, and the state legislature kind of put us all in a sticky situation, and no one ever likes to raise taxes. We'd much rather lower taxes, but I appreciate making that hard decision to do what's right for our kids, and I really appreciate how hard you all have worked and that you all are gonna, I'm assuming, approve this. If you don't, well, I would encourage you to approve the budget. And just thank you for making those hard decisions. The FTE changes in the lower grades, I'm already seeing the benefits of knowing what that's looking like at at my own local school. And we just really appreciate the hard work of making sure you pay all of our teachers well and all take care of our schools and do all of the other many things that the legislator is asking us to do. So thank you.
Thank you, Amy. We have one more. Right, we're going to invite Michelle Jones to come on up. Make sure you state your name for the record.
Michelle Jones, GEA President. I just wanted to reiterate what Amy was just saying of what a sticky position the legislature has put you all in. I think that the public really needs to know that a lot of this tax increase has nothing to do with your poor planning, except for they've made it so that you couldn't know all the changes that were going to be happening and done to you rather than with you. So thank you for always working so hard for our students and having such a clear eye on what's most important, which is supporting our students. And I would also encourage you to pass this budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. All right, with no other people who are signed up and wanting to comment, we're going to go ahead and close the public portion of this, the public comment portion of this, and we'll go ahead and turn the time over to our board members for questions. Julie, why don't you take 5 minutes and speak what you can in 5 minutes, and we can always come back to you if you need.
For our budget, that was the talent development budget, it said that we were putting in money for extra admin for a 0.5 assistant principal. So does that mean that this coming year, every school should expect a half of a principal, at least, assistant principal?
They will have at least a half of administrative support. We've created a new position called Dean of Students. The idea is that we think that there's a finite number of interns that we should have, interns, intern assistant principals. And if we exceed that, there's just ramifications that are hurtful to the school and the district. So we wanted to create a position that isn't as expensive as an assistant principal. So we've created the Dean of Students position, which can do all administrative duties except for supervise teachers, meaning they can't do evaluations of teachers, but they can do all the other administrative tasks.
IEPs, behaviors, a lot of other factors. So this will be the first year in Granite School District history that every school will have additional administrative support, and we're very grateful.
Okay. The next question is that in the operations budget, you've got around 2 million plus of money that's coming from budgetary savings and school closures. And I know my community is going to be saying, well, how much of that is coming from school closures? Can you speak to that?
About $1.3 million is coming directly from the school closures.
And so that's from 2 schools closing?
Correct.
Correct, okay. The property taxes capital local, so the local section of the capital, you were showing me around 59 million, and I just wanted to make sure that my expectation is clear. That is not going to any current projects, is that right? That is how much we have in our budget for future projects. Will you make sure I've got my expectations right?
Yeah, so the 58.6 million on this screen is what you're referring to.
Yeah, that's what I'm referring to.
So that is funding for the pay-as-you-go model of continuing to rebuild and renovate schools. And a portion of that could potentially be used to close out the Cypress and Skyline projects, but the bulk of that from fiscal year 26 is going towards future projects after those 2 are completed, right? So there's a piece of it to finish those out, but like the Cypress project, we're nearing the tail end of that. And so a good chunk of what's in this 58 million is going towards future projects that are programmed and scheduled.
So what, and if I think I remember that we're increasing this around 2 million
Yes.
This year. I mean, so it will still be a while before we can add a new project. I mean, we could add remodels, but not a new rebuild for a few years, right? I know we already talked about this. I just want to.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
that 2027.
So this is the funding source that gets us through this schedule.
Okay, that's good to connect that. And then also do we invest that money?
So every dollar that the district is holding on to, with the exception of a piece that's used to fund ongoing operational needs that are, we're going to pay payroll this week, and so we need money in our checking account in order to do that. Everything else is invested in the PTIF, in the Public Treasurer's Investment Fund, and earns a return as it's invested in there. And those dollars flow back into the capital fund. It's all based on the number of dollars from each fund, and that money flows back into the fund that generated it.
I can't believe it's never occurred to me to ask that.
Well, you do recall earlier on in the session, there were some legislative questions about the
Well, that I think is why
enormous
it's
fund balances.
on my mind.
Those are those funds that we're talking about, the ones that are legally required to be retained in savings, and other funds that are already being placed, or encumbered is the technical term, while we're waiting for those projects to launch. And we're going to obviously be as conservative with those funds and try to earn some money off of them while we're waiting for those projects to go through, or while we're retaining those funds as required by law.
I think the public should expect nothing less of us. That is what is called responsible, financial planning, right? My last question is that, so I just want to make sure I understand the timeline, and I know that this is set by statute, or state statute, but we approved the budget tonight, but then we don't approve the tax rate until August. So there's a chance that we'll approve a budget, and then we could always choose not to approve the tax rate. And then we would, in that case, have to adjust the budget, because we can do that anytime. Am I correct on that?
Correct. So the timeline that we're under is June 22nd. You have to preliminarily adopt the certified rates or the tax rates that you'll impose. So that's why we're meeting today. We have a June 22nd deadline. technically the budget has to be adopted by June 30. It doesn't make sense for us to hold two different meetings, so we do it all together. We have two motions to accomplish those two tasks tonight, but that's how that works. Yes, we then start the fiscal year July 1. We have our truth and taxation August 5th. We're 1 month, if you will, into the operating season. And so you can still make decisions on August 5th. We would have to then scale back or adjust to whatever is adopted on August 5th.
And
So-
we couldn't hold that truth and taxation before August 5th.
No,
Because we need to know the tax
there are
rate.
other regulations. So tax notices have to go out to property owners around July 22nd. So you can't meet any sooner than that. And then the truth and taxation hearing can't take place until 10 days after that date.
Okay.
So August 1st is like the closest you'd ever get. We're on August 5th. We're as close as you can get.
And plus, that's established by Salt Lake County to make sure that all the local taxing entities don't hold their meetings on the same time to allow taxpayers to be able to go to multiple meetings. So we don't actually set that date, it's set for us.
Well, fortunately, they cooperate with us. We recommend a date, and so far they have adopted our recommendation. So we're very grateful to their help there.
Thanks for your hard work on this budget and on the tax situation.
Could I further address that a little bit further? Because you bring up an excellent point, which puts us in a bit of a pickle, because as part of this budget proposal, we are adopting employee compensation packages, which will go into effect July 1. And so if we adopt a budget and then retract on that budget at some point in time, obviously we'd have to take in consideration the commitments we've already made to our employees, part of negotiations and other pieces that we've already kind of voted on the board has voted on along the way. It's a really strange timeline.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that you asked the question so that we could clarify for the general public how that puts us in a bit of a bind to kind of approve something, implement it, and then go back and ask for their feedback on a tax increase.
And then go get the revenue.
Yeah,
I mean, I think it's really flawed.
yeah.
Okay, Julie, thanks for your questions. Kim, go ahead.
I just wanted a clarifying question about why. So the first motion is about approving the revised 2024-2025 budget. Isn't there better wording for that? I mean, we're basically saying we agree this is what the budget ended up being. We're not like approving anything, it's done, right? So are we saying it that way because it's required by law?
Yeah, so every budget is adopted by the board. So we've been operating under what we call the working budget, and then we're now formalizing that at this stage, which is an adoption action by the board.
Sure, but say the board voted no.
You could, and we'd have to
Then
close
what?
our books out differently, yes.
Also, we were just saying that a budget is a projection, and it feels like we ought to really be approving like the financial outcomes or the financial statements of the year, the end of year statements, if you will. So we were just talking about that before the meeting. Is there something in state statute that says we need to approve the budget at the end of the year?
Well, under statute, you can adopt the budget once and just run the whole year through and hope that your estimates were accurate and correct.
Yeah.
In the course of the year, we will have other grant awards that we may not have anticipated when we put the budget together. There are adjustments that happen to grant awards. We received notices from the federal government just recently that said, oh, we were going to give you some money, now we're not. And so we have to acknowledge that and allow those to be adopted into a budget. We save them up, if you will, till the end of the season and then the budget season, and then we just have one single motion there. But we could be meeting throughout the year as these events happen and hold a budget hearing like today. It would be another budget hearing, very much in format like today, and adopt them as we go. We just save them up for one single action.
Still, for purposes of like anybody who's listening, if we approve that budget, it's just, we're basically acknowledging the planned budget changed in this way, and it's now done. That's all we're saying. So just clarifying that.
Since Kim's asking, what are the changes? What are the significant changes in the 2024-2025 budget?
I think Todd hit the big ones, which would be just changes to grants and awards that are given to us or awarded to us or taken away from us in some cases. And those budgets can create essentially differences between what we initially projected and where we're landing at the end of the year. We want our budget ultimately to reflect everything that we're actually doing so that we're in compliance with state laws around budgeting, that we should not be exceeding. The expenditures of the district should not exceed the formally adopted budget, right? And so by making changes at the end of the year, we're helping to comply with that as well. But that would be the big things that have changed in the budget. It's not significantly different or changing in an upward way from what the initial adopted budget was. In most cases, it's actually going to end up being lower than what we had initially adopted at the beginning of the year.
And just to be clear, that budget ends end of June, correct?
Correct.
So July
Yep.
1 is the beginning of our new our fiscal year.
Yep.
Thanks. Kim, did you have anything else? Connie, go ahead.
I want to say thank you for the budget hearing, the way you put it together. I don't think I've ever seen the details of the budget like this. I mean, this is really nice. So thank you very much for putting that together. Then remind me, do we get another book that finalizes that 24-25 budget? Do you put together something that we get later on, or am I not?
So the budget book that is published right now already includes that 24-25 budget. So if you go look at each of the funds, there's a column for this current school year and a column for next year that shows you each of those pieces.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
And mentioned earlier, there's another book, the financial report. That also, by reporting requirements, has us put the original budget, the adjusted budget, and then the next year's budget. So you can see the whole tracking of what's happening in that document as well.
Okay.
But that won't come out for a few more months.
Right, and it seems to me like we see a working budget and then we see what was planned. I don't know the words. Thank you.
Thanks, Connie. Chris, did you have anything?
I just want to say thank you. I love that we are prioritizing our strategic plan with our budget. Like we can see what we have for our different, like where we're putting our money is where we want it to be. And so I appreciate that you guys took the time to deliberately make that part of this budget proposal. And it's just easy to read and very clear. So thanks for all your hard work.
Thanks. Clerk, did you have anything?
Nothing at this point, thanks.
Thanks, Clark. I just had a couple questions. Last year, we had a budget that we were trying to be very, very strategic about as far as we didn't want to raise taxes. And so I know we had some one-time funding that went, some ongoing expenses that we used one-time funds for. Have those been filled this year, or are those continuing to be filled with one-time money?
So in this budget, there were probably three major programs. One was the administrators, the administrative support. That is now switching over to be ongoing dollars instead of one time. So that has been resolved, if you will, or taken care of on an ongoing basis. We had money for the special education program, where we have the co-teach model. We're wrapping up the first year of that experience. We believe that we need another year of data to know how well that program is performing. Two data points gives you a line, three give you a trend. You know, it's best to hold on for a number of years. But at this point, that is still one-time dollars as that program goes into its second year. And then the third has to do with the preschool program. Part of that money now has come. We were able to represent that as receiving a grant, but that was about $1.5 million that we were short this year that we're in. And we anticipate that we still will have one-time funds for that program next year.
So that 1 million for the preschool is still being funded through one-time money?
Correct.
But we're hoping that we will see some more funding for
That improvements will come in funding opportunities.
If your fingers aren't crossed, then I'm going to be very disappointed.
Thank you for keeping that preschool program going. I think that is so huge that you guys found that one-time funding to figure that out.
I think there's some parents that are, as I've heard in the news this week, some of our local daycares are shutting their doors, and I think there's going to be parents who are grateful for that program to continue. I just had a question on the proposed property tax increase. If we kept the capital local levy the same rate, because you said on that one, you said it's, even though it's increasing, it's not increasing as much as what it could have. What could it have been? What would it have been had we kept it the same rate? So we are dropping that rate from what it is currently, correct? Even though we are still increasing our revenue there. What would that be?
So this proposal is 0.001760, right, is the rate, that proposed rate, if my math is right, between the capital local blue piece and the debt service piece. It could have gone up to 0.001812, which would have generated an additional 2.4 million into the capital fund if we would have kept that rate frozen at the same as last year.
So the impact on a taxpayer would basically be to double. So if you go to the next page, if you doubled that $13, that would roughly be what it could have been.
Okay. That was just my question with that. I want to reemphasize for anybody listening that I know we had two people appreciate their comments that we have been put into a difficult position. Of the things that we have as expenses this year, the school safety requirements, the school fee loss, the pro staff money, and the parental postpartum leave, all of which were ones that we did not have a choice in, most of which I look at and think that is not something that would benefit or move towards our strategic plan, and yet we are being asked to fund these ourselves. This is frustrating, I think, in so many ways, and it puts us in a very hard position. But as a board, we've tried to be as conservative as possible in our budgets, and I appreciate Ben and Todd and Brian and your teams and looking for ways that we can really conserve and where we can use our money wisely. And I do appreciate that this was going towards what our strategic plan is, and that this is the money that we have is important for us to keep our students moving forward and to invest in good teachers who will continue to work with our students and help them. So thank you so much for that. We really appreciate that. If there's no further questions. Oh, would you? Okay. Go ahead.
I just want to comment that I think that there were some of those cuts to our funding from the state that were intentional, where lawmakers intentionally said, yeah, we think that local school boards can step up on this one and fund these things, where they were intentional. But then there were other areas where they weren't intentional, like where maybe it impacted us, but not anybody else, right? And lawmakers thought, oh, this is a great idea, but didn't understand the consequences of how that would look and play out. And so I want to recognize that, because I think I think some of it was unintentional, and education finance is so complex. And I want to use that example to reiterate the importance that school districts, superintendents, BAs, school board members be invited to the conversation, and that we have a seat at the table, and that it's a collaborative effort when we talk about education, because I think that will help us to cut down on some of these unintended consequences that we're facing here in our budgetary situation.
Ready? there's no further questions, I will entertain, we've got 4 motions that have been suggested tonight.
I move that we approve the final revised 2024-2025 budget as published.
I'll second.
All right, I have a motion and a second to approve the final revised 2024-2025 budget as published. Is there any further comment? All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, motion carries.
Okay. I move that we adopt the proposed 2025-2026 budget as published.
We have a motion and a second to adopt the proposed 2025-2026 budget as published. Are there any comments?
I do have a comment here. Just want to reiterate public comments and things that others have said. So while I think a majority of this year's proposed tax increase has nothing to do with the legislature, but decisions that the district has made, a lot of it is still. And so I do think it's worth noting the legislature's role in the budget. And so I'm just kind of repeating what you've already said, but the pattern of approving grants and funding for various programs and then pulling that funding when schools have become dependent on the programs, combined with continual passage of new, expensive, unfunded mandates that schools have to abide by, is not helpful, to say the least. Beyond that, though, I have a couple of other concerns. There's definitely pros to this budget, and I'm not trying to diminish those, but I have concerns. Last month, this board approved, for example, an expense amount of $6.5 million, $4.5 million of which was just for Chromebooks, according to the information I was given when I asked. So $4.5 million, that's equal to like a third of this tax increase in just one item. And an item that I think has become overused and that I think will ultimately lead to a reduced need for teachers. And I know we've had discussions on this. I know the district has, reinforced the statement that they won't let that happen, but I just don't see how you avoid it if we continue down this trajectory of this ongoing increased reliance on electronic curriculum and devices. I think teachers will simply become facilitators of tech down the road. So these funds, as well as others we spend on various third-party contracts, electronic curriculum, things like that, I don't support in the budget. And then finally, the budget, as we've seen, creates a sizable tax increase when so many people are struggling even more than they were last year. And so with all those things together, I personally just don't feel that I can in good conscience approve this budget. So, for all of your awareness.
Thank you, Kim. Any other comments? All right. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Nay.
I'm sorry, Clark, we didn't get you.
Aye.
All right, motion carries.
Ready for a third motion? I move that we set the preliminary tax rate at 0.006164, subject to changes in the state basic levy.
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second that we set the preliminary tax rate to 0.006164, subject to changes in the state basic levy. Are there any further comments on this?
Just same comment as I just made.
All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed?
Nay.
Okay, motion carries.
Okay, I move that we schedule a truth in taxation hearing to be held on August 5th, 2025 at 7:30 p.m.
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second that we schedule a truth and taxation hearing to be held on August 5th, 2025 at 7:30 p.m. Any further comment on that? All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, motion carries. All right. That is all we have on our agenda, and without any,
Having come to the
having come to the end of it, I was going to say without any objection,